And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is William Brent Bell. He is the director of a number of horror films, including Stay Alive, The Boy and the Devil Inside. His latest film, Orphan First Kill, is hitting theaters, VOD, and Paramount Plus on August 19th. Welcome to the show, Brent!
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Being here.
I cannot wait to dig into both your movie and also the movie you brought with you because, boy. But let's take it back to the start. How did you get introduced to horror?
Well, I would say probably that movie.
Okay.
Definitely. Because I saw a movie once that we'll talk about later. But, it played on like late night TV. And if you watch it, it has almost a TV movie quality to it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's the score. And I just, I was probably a little younger than the kids in the movie. It's about two 9-year-old twins, but I was probably 6, 7. And just my parents weren't paying attention to what I did. And I was just up watching movies and it's just a movie that scarred me for life. I've, all these years later and all the movies I've made and certainly in the movies I've developed and stuff, it's only been the last few years that I've really been like, oh, wow, like that movie's really dictated so much of what I've done as a filmmaker. And but even last year, my sister knows this because she was probably the one that made me watch it. And I know we're jumping ahead, but we're not. But and she got me I got a new copy of the book for Christmas this year, and it's just one of those things.
Is your sister older than you?
Yeah, she's like 4.5 years older than me. So it's that age where she completely hated me as a kid and would try to drown me, and so that as a kid it was that and Trilogy of Terror, which was also on television.
Yeah,
it was the doll segment, and so for my whole life. As a child until I still have very vivid memories of it, but until I was probably 11, after watching Trilogy of Terror, the Zulu doll segment on ABC, I couldn't sit at a couch without thinking there was a witch underneath the couch with that doll. And if I put my legs down, they would cut my feet off, cut my at the ankles.
Holy
shit. I still have just a vivid memory of that just was a superstition I had. And I would keep my legs up for years, for 3 or 4 years,
Holy cow.
So those are two movies that definitely probably were introduced to me in that age range on television.
Did that
from my sister.
Did that make you like horror movies, or did that make you want to avoid them like the plague?
I loved it. I mean, I was scared by it. When I was a kid, prior to divorce, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So kind of lonely. And, but in my bedroom, I thought every night that through the window, my room would become like a flea market and this witch would come in and I would hide under my bed and that she would come around. And if she saw me move, she'd buy me and take me.
Oh,
and every night I thought this witch would visit my room and go around and, it sounds really creepy. So while I was scared of horror stuff, The Shining, I remember very early, seeing that woman in the bathtub was something that freaked me out. And The Exorcist, seeing the flashes, I remember that really young, of the, the subliminal advertising they did in it, sort of, or subliminal messaging. But no, I was never scared of it in a way that made me not be excited about it and want to be a part of telling those stories.
So from an early age, did you know that you wanted to do something creative?
I always did creative things, but I don't think I ever knew that it would become my career.
Yeah.
I just I got kicked out of high school because for the last 2 years I never went to school. I just made movies.
Oh wow.
But I certainly never thought but then I'm going to go off and make movies. I just kind of only like making movies. So I just did that.
Okay.
So, and then at one point I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go trying to make movies.
Hell yeah.
That's amazing.
So what were some of your favorite horror movies as a kid growing up?
I mean, those things I mentioned, but Halloween's definitely my favorite. Okay. And same thing, those were really early. Halloween, Friday the 13th, things like that. But Halloween in particular, just because, that score, which it's impossible to use that score as temp in a movie when you're editing it. But I mean, if you do try to do that, it's got so many themes and so many different melodies that are all so scary. Like 7 of them that are as scary as Tubular Bells from The Exorcist,
Yeah.
And then, you watch that movie, which was about, I was like the age of the little kids when I saw that film, but then my sister was like the age of, Carrie and all those guys. And so that was kind of my life, was being around babysitters.
Wow.
And then, you watch that movie. I'm more of a fan, certainly, of, like, for me, the first one. And then they just they become more and more caricatures of themselves a bit.
Right.
And that happens. But, when I talk to people about it, it's just much more of a Hitchcockian movie. And where, at the end of the day, there's a couple people killed, but really it's only those few people at the end.
It's a small body count for a movie that would go on to, or a series that would go on to kill hundreds of people. It has relatively a small body count in the original, but there's so much tension. I mean, it's the shape and that town and the anticipation. Yeah, I love it. And when a stranger calls, such an overlooked movie.
Minutes, so great. I mean, the first 15 minutes and the last 5 are just, and they tried to make the remake.
Have you seen the sequel, When a Stranger Calls Back?
I know of it. I don't know that I'm sure I did kind of watch it.
It's actually kind of fun. It has like a killer that's hiding against a wall towards the end, and it's just such a perfect moment. It doesn't quite hit the intensity of that first one, but it's actually quite a fun sequel.
Well, I mean, it's one of those. The original is one of those movies that, like the movie, a lot of people don't even know the movie. I mean, the movie was this it wasn't even about her, It became about this cop trying to find this killer. But those first 15 minutes and that, the calls coming from in the house, so simple, but it's just one of those things that you can't forget.
Yeah.
And those are a couple of my favorites for sure. And then the recent ones are, it's very different. I mean, Rosemary's Baby, and now today things, Get Out, Hereditary. There's just so much good stuff. Get Out, Hereditary, The Witch. I mean, I just,
So I'm curious. So what continues to draw you to horror and continues to draw you to want to make horror movies as an adult? I
mean, probably a couple things. I mean, it's an extremely creative tableau for making films, and partly because we can make them slightly outside the system and have a little more freedom. And I think a lot of people who aren't that as into horror think of horror and they have a very knee-jerk reaction, whatever their perception of horror is, which is usually more slasher type gory. They think they don't like it when, of course, they've probably watched a lot of horror and didn't even know it and really loved it.
Exactly.
And it's such a spectrum. So like the film I just did in London is totally different, than like Orphan First Kill. I mean, they couldn't be more different. And so it's just such a wide spectrum of whatever kind of stories you want to tell. And then, Stephen King says we make horrors to help us deal with the real ones. And I think that's really true. So you can kind of tell a very personal or a story that has a lot of social commentary if you want, in horror. And then anytime I'm finishing a movie or whatever, and then I'm thinking of another one and I'm talking to people about other projects, and then it's always like, oh, here's this science fiction project and it's, a much bigger movie and I'm kind of knee deep in. And then it's like right now, Orphan First Kill is coming out. And the excitement and it doesn't even matter to me. It's like, it could be that they all hate it or they love it. It's just such a passion that you're not going to get if you do a rom-com or even a science fiction movie. You're just, it's cool and it'll be great and it'll, fun to make and People will love it, hopefully, whatever your project is. But the horror world and the fandom and the excitement that gets built up around it, it's just everything. And then I'm just like, like testing a horror film and just sitting back and listening to the audience gasp or giggle or stay quiet or scream.
I have to say that I cackled in Orphan First Kill at a specific moment. I was like, yes. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but like that, speaking of that kind of visceral reaction, I had that reaction, and then I found out some of my friends that are writers had seen the movie, and we were DMing back and forth, and like, oh my gosh, when X happened, I was like, yes, this moment, and it just, I love that. I love that feeling that horror can give.
What does that mean? Can you give me a hint of what the cackle moment was?
We'll edit this out.
Edit this out.
I yelled. My fiance was like, "What is going on?" I'm like,
"Yeah, I mean." Yeah.
So can you tell our listeners a little bit about what Orphan First Kill is?
Well, it's a prequel to Orphan that's set in 2007, a couple years before that film, and we meet Esther. We're in on her secret now. We know that she's an adult. We meet her at an asylum where she's a patient, and she escapes and uses her condition, which, makes her kind of look childlike and young and small, to pose as the missing daughter of a very wealthy family in the States. And that gets her out of the Eastern Bloc into America. And then she gets kind of caught up with this family. But it becomes complicated.
It does get complicated. Yes. What drew you to this project? I have to ask.
I've known a lot of the producers of Dark Castle forever.
Which, by the way, sorry, side note, it was so cool to see that logo on the screen again.
Yeah. I mean, that's them. They're relaunching, and this is kind of their big first thing. They've done a couple smaller things, and they did a movie, and then they did what was the name of the little funny TV Quibble?
Oh, Quibi. Oh,
Quibi.
Yeah, they did a Quibi series, which could have been great if that worked, but it didn't.
Yeah.
But and so we were talking about, and then also E1 and all those guys. I love all those people, and I've worked with them before, and so it's a lot of people I really like, and it's important for me to work with people I like, and then working with someone like Dark Castle, people who understand the genre space makes making a genre movie, no matter what the tone of it is, so much more successful, creatively.
Yeah.
And then they called me and said, "Hey, we have a script, do you want to read this?" And it's a prequel to Orphan. And I was like, yeah, I'll read it. I mean, like, definitely. I was like, I'll tell you right now, I'm not probably going to want to make the movie because there's no way you're going to have a twist that lives up to the first. And I was like, and I don't know who you could ever fill the shoes of Isabel Fuhrman. But I was like, but as a fan, I'll definitely read it. Like, this will be great. And they're like, well, we don't want to tell you too much, but we think you'll like it. And there is a twist, but we're not going to say anything. And I read it that day, and even kind of looking for the twist, totally it surprised me. And it was very, it was very much as it is sort of in the movie. And I was even talking with Alex Mace at Dark Castle, and we were joking about, we still have the messages we sent to each other. And it was like, holy shit, like, you guys killed this. I can't believe it. Like, let's, and so I was in there that following week, meeting with them and trying to figure out how to make the movie. And then also trying to figure out, like, okay, what are we going to do about Esther?
Yeah.
Which could be the next movie. What are we going to do about Esther?
About Esther. A prequel to the prequel to Orphan.
But so it was it took me off guard. I wasn't planning on doing, because I was talking to them actually about Lord of Misrule, which I said is totally different tonally. And so this was a totally different tone, and but it was such a good script that it was just like, oh shit. We have to, pursue this to the fullest extent here and see what we can do.
Hell yeah.
And turn into a movie.
Were you ever, like, I mean, obviously when you first read it, you were like, there's no way you could beat it. But in making this movie, were you ever worried about how people were going to react, or like filling the shoes of this movie that I feel like had such an impact when it was released?
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, we were in a bit of a vacuum at first until we announced it, you know. So for a few months, we were just kind of doing drafts of the script. And then when we announced it, a few things. I mean, I've never, in all the movies I made and being around it, I've never felt the wave of fans and intensity that I did, where people were, I mean, it was like death threats, you know, like,
wow.
You cannot make
Orphan?
this movie without. Yeah.
About any,
well, they were just like, you
any
can't make
movie,
this
but
movie.
Orphan?
Well, they're like, you can't make this movie without Isabel Fuhrman. Like that's, or she is Esther. You can never do this movie without her. You know, don't make this movie. Because, you know, assuming we were going to cast a little girl, which we did, we were doing it. We were casting in parallels. We were doing the movie with Isabel. But then Isabel also reached out to me that day and was just like, oh, I'm so excited you're doing it. And I was doing a screening that night. So I was like, why don't you come to the screening? And I'd never met her in person. And she showed up and it was like, oh, wow. Like you look the same almost, you know, compared to most people. Like she didn't change much. Yeah. She just kind of was 20% scaled up. And, but then she made it really clear, like she just wanted me to know that she wanted, like this was her character. And if there was any way to do it, she wanted to play Esther again. And so it was like seeing her and what she looked like coupled with her passion for it, which I would never do the movie without her completely wanting to do it. And then this wave of passion from the fans, you know, that Monday, because we had dinner the next night, went through the whole script. And then that Monday, I think, or something, I had a meeting with all the producers and said, because they were at that point, you just were looking at her to be a cameo. Probably is the character in the beginning, the doctor who gets killed.
Okay.
But you know, I think everybody really was excited. They wanted to do it. They loved the idea, but they just weren't convinced we could do it. So then it took a year so to answer your question, I was very worried about that. And, for the whole process, but once she came on board, you know, people are going to say what they're going to say, but I'm like, just, you know, see the movie. And if you're really a fan of hers, like passionately, you should really appreciate the movie, whether you love it or just don't love it. It's like a love letter to her.
I was very surprised at how much I loved it, because I was in the camp of like, how are you going to make a prequel to a movie in which everyone knows the twist, right? And I'm also not a huge fan of prequels because I feel like it's always backstory that is getting, but this is a completely interesting story. It's not a remake of the first one, which is another fear I had originally. I was like, is it just going to be like a rehash of the first one? And it's not. It surprised the absolute fuck out of me in such a great way. I'm watching it again this week, and I'm so excited to watch it without having to have my notepad out and taking notes.
That'll be great. That'll be great. I'm excited for people to see it.
Yeah.
It's just,
I mean, people are seeing it.
Yeah. It's really, I think we've talked about this before on the podcast because we had an episode about Orphan, actually.
We did.
And I love Orphan. I saw it in theaters when it first came out. I think it's like it's incredibly campy. And I was so impressed with how much you captured that camp sensibility of Orphan. I was so happy because I was like, you gotta get campy. And it's just, it's really quite impressive how you're able to capture that. Like, again, it's really cool just seeing the camp of Orphan again, because it's so unique and weird and fun. And it's just, it's just a good time.
You know, and I think part of the reason the camp of it is unique is because like the first film had such a stellar cast that wasn't typical of the genre space necessarily. And this one kind of, you know, I think does too. And
Julia Stiles. There she is.
Yeah, it's like she can try to be as campy as she possibly can be, but she always has this air of believability no matter what.
Always grounded.
Yeah. So it's like a different actress would have made it really feel campy. Like the movie would have really, but with her, she set the tone, and it doesn't matter how over the top or absurd a situation is in a story. It's like, even when she's trying to play to the fun of it, she's always going to, make it feel
perfect
believable.
Casting. Perfect casting. It
really
so
was.
good
It really
to see her in it.
Yeah.
So, okay, Brent, we've talked about your relationship to horror. We've talked a little bit about the movie you brought today, but let's formally introduce the film that we are discussing today. Brent, what is it?
The movie we're discussing today is called The Other, from 1972.
So, for many of you who might not be familiar with this, let me read a quick synopsis. In The Other, a series of gruesome accidents plague a small American farming community in the summer of 1935, encircling two identical twin brothers and their family.
Yeah, so you kind of set the scene a little bit, but can you go a little bit more in depth? How old were you when you saw this? How did you see this? It sounded like your sister got you to see it. What were your thoughts, and what about this movie terrified you?
So I probably saw it when I was around 6 or 7, because it was probably after my parents divorced. And then, and I saw it at my grandmother's house, like on a fold out couch bed or whatever.
Wow.
Like just, it was late night television, and it was playing on TV. And my sister, around that time, when she would have to babysit me, she totally just would watch scary movies and put me in that position.
As a good older sibling should.
It is. And even my mother, when she got me every other weekend, she would take me to horror films. And even today, she's like, no, I never would have done that. I was like, how did I see these movies? I saw them with you. And, but I remember watching actually The Other, like my father came in the first time I watched it. I remember the light of the TV and the weird fold out couch, because we were at my grandmother's. I think I said that. And, but it's such a creepy movie that, especially, in a time when you didn't have as many distractions, that at midnight, for like a 7-year-old who shouldn't be up, watching this spooky movie that has such a tone to it. And then it's about, two kind of 9-year-old, I think, twin brothers who, they look like Danny from The Shining, sort of. Yeah. And I kind of looked like that at the time, and it totally did. And everything from, even the movie I just did, everything from when Holland would run around and you would hear his weird metal tin thing in his pocket, like shaking, and you'd hear this stuff. And in the movie I just did, I had the girl, and she had this thing, and when she's running up the steps, you just hear that same sound. It didn't have as much of an impact on the story as this did, because what was in that container, were horrible things, sort of.
Yeah.
And then, you just watch that movie, the visuals of everything from the circus to, it was a beautifully shot movie. To him having, what would they call it? The great gift, or the great.
Oh, the great game. The great game that they would play. Mm-hmm.
Which was crazy. That was like a crazy twist to that movie, that the kid, could see the world through the eyes of a bird. But that wasn't anything that really drew me to it necessarily. To me, it was like very creepy, because it felt very real that these kids were doing these bad things. When the cousin jumped off the barn into the haystack with the pitchfork, this is something that I'll never forget, and I'll never forget the way that they introduced it. They just started hard cutting to like a pitchfork. And then 5 minutes later, you saw this obnoxious kid. I'm the king of the mountain. And then, so it's like, I'll never forget that weird shot. Mm-hmm. And then the twist, how that happens, and the way the aunt is screaming at him and showing him the tombstone. Mm-hmm. I get chills every single time I think.
He's thrown on top of it. He's like draped over top of it, and she's like, "Look at it!" And I'm like, "Good God, this kid is 9 years old."
I know, but he's evil. I think, right? He pushed Holland down that well, I think, or not Holland. Yeah, Holland.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. That's probably the first time I'd ever seen a twist. And still, it's at the time, especially like as good as anything, and just creepy to me, like just the realization, and then just the emotion of this woman realizing, like, my sweet boy is evil, actually, and going to the casket, cutting off his father's finger for a ring. That's something that just I'll never forget. And the way his mother looked at him, and then of course what happens at the end. But then I pitch that final moment, where it's like the auntie is, sacrificed herself,
self-immolating
him, and then you see the broken lock, and we come across, and there he is up in the window, and that great freeze frame. So I've pitched that moment so many times because, you're kind of going, what does that mean? He broke the lock, or is it supernatural now?
Right.
Like, what's going on? Did Holland get him out of there? Like, it's just so many things. The circus, I guess it was a circus, right? Kind of a freak show.
Yeah.
The carnival type.
I mean, just the visuals of that. Like, there's just so many things about it.
I have to ask, since you were so young when you saw this, did the kid falling down the well, did the baby in the wine casket at the end, like, did these like leave images in your brain? Because it's haunting as a 41-year-old watching it.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, I still, him reading the book about the evil dwarves that switched the baby.
Oh, the changelings. Yeah.
Yes. That movie, everything about that definitely is indelibly stuck in my mind, to where it's like anytime I'm in a situation with a story and trying to do something creepy and scary that appeals to me, I find myself just like, it's almost like memories. I have more memories of that movie as a child than I do of my childhood in that time period.
Wow.
Wow.
Holy shit. But I mean, this is a movie that would have such an effect on you, though, because I mean, like, I was texting Terry after watching it and saying, I need to take a shower. Like, as an adult, it was so upsetting. And like, it's interesting because it is a slower burn. I mean, at the beginning, you kind of have this like building up of terrible cursed accidents, like such a cursed family movie vibe of like, cool. So everyone's just dying everywhere, like dropping like flies on this farm. There's this kid running around in little shorts and socks, and just like his brother somehow like stays in a shed. I was like, Terry, is the brother dead, or is he just a weird gremlin who like lives in the barn? Like, I'm not quite sure where this is going, because I was like, but it's so interesting because it's like, I'm trying to predict the twist here, but then I'm thinking, this is one of the first movies I think that probably had such a wild twist. Like, well,
I think so. Yeah.
Watching it in 2022, you're like, oh yeah, I know this. But like when you saw it when you were younger, and when it first came out, people were like, I have no fucking what? Like, I'm not used to the character being dead this whole, like, it's especially a boy,
right? A
small child being evil and killing babies. I mean, like, there's just something so jarring about, and especially because this is the director of To Kill a Mockingbird, which when I was looking up this movie, I was like, are you kidding me? Because To Kill a Mockingbird in my family, like, my family's obsessed with To Kill a Mockingbird, like any good white suburban middle-class family. We love To Kill a Mockingbird, and my family loves it, my mom loves it, and it's so fascinating to go from, like, that to, and I haven't seen any of this director's other movies, Robert Mulligan, correct? Is that his name? Mulligan?
Yeah. That's right.
But, again, he sets up that kind of To Kill a Mockingbird tone at the beginning, this almost idyllic looking farm. Yeah. Like, it's just a young kid on the farm, just, living his life. His dad has died. His mom is depressed, is like in billowy robes, and adults are yelling at him and all this stuff. And it has that kind of like idyllic small town kid movie air to it. And I was like, what is going to happen here? And it just takes an absolute nosedive into hell on earth.
Yeah.
And
it always felt, by the way, like it was in a European part of the world to me. And maybe because it's set, kind of around the Great Depression in America, that it was a different time. But I think growing up, thought it was like in Norway or something.
Well, I mean, also Uta has like, a very thick, like she's going with that kind of German, Russian, Germanic, like accent. So I can understand that for sure.
Well, the family seems so close too.
Yeah, there's so much family there.
Like, I was trying to figure out who was who. I think I still had some problem, like, who is whose sibling, who is whose sister, who is whose grandma, because it's that big house, and I feel like there's like the big family all living in this house, and they all kind of are meshed together. But then there's the older neighbor woman, right, who dies, and then there's the help. Is he like the farmhand, the Italian guy?
Yeah.
Okay. Because everyone is like kind of all smashed together, that they all run together in your head a little bit. And maybe that's just me, but it did kind of feel like it's family members. But that also kind of, to me, reminds me of when you're a kid and all these people kind of run together in your head. Like, your family somehow. But I don't know.
That's one thing that I've watched the movie over the years, over and over. And when you talk about it that way of trying to kind of like, who's connected to who? It's like, maybe because I saw it when I was young, I just kind of, it's like a haze to all the people in that movie. And I've never really overthought it. Like, I've never put together this idea that he was only in the barn, and I'm just going, oh, is that like the way it is? Like, but I never noticed that.
Yeah.
So this was the very first time that I saw like Mary Beth. I had never even heard of this film. When it was suggested from our PR person, I'm so glad that they put in there not the Nicole Kidman, the others, because that was what I first immediately thought, and I was like, wow, that's more of a relatively recent film. But then I was like, oh, the other, I've never even heard of this, and then I started looking up, and I'm like, man, this is like. Robert Mulligan is the director. Jerry Goldsmith did the soundtrack to it, which Jerry Goldsmith, we have a lot of love for him on this podcast.
Yeah.
And then Uta Hagen is in it. And then the cinematographer is Robert Surtees. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but Ben-Hur, The Graduate. This movie was sandwiched in between The Last Picture Show and The Sting. Like, there's a lot of talent working both in front and behind the camera in this movie.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how do people not know about this? Because I had no idea that this thing...
The book was 6 months on the New York Times bestseller list.
No shit,
yeah.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's wild to me. And then I'm watching this, and watching it in 2022 is a little bit weird, because we've seen the kind of dead twin, plot twist an awful lot with, I'm thinking in particular, Tale of Two Sisters and the American remake, The Uninvited, and also Good Night Mommy, is that what it's called?
Yep.
And so, like, watching this now is immediately, oh, one of them is dead, because like the way that it was edited. But thinking back to, if I had seen this back in the 70s, this movie would have blown my mind because of how unexpected it would have been.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I don't know what movies were like that back then. But it is the first, I mean, I feel like, some of the first twists I remember, like Sixth Sense, which was 20 something years later. But that kind of, and that's why I was talking to somebody about, I was with Roy Lee. We almost, we pursued like remaking this. Fox had the rights to it, like maybe 10 years ago. But that twist is so obvious nowadays, like, oh, really? That's the twist?
The thing is, though, is that, like, yes, there's that twist, and I'm happy that it happens, about like around the midpoint of the film. And so it's not all about that twist, because what happens afterwards is where like things just start to spiral.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, now I see why this movie scarred him for life, because this movie is fucking with me just from that moment on. It's just like death after death and trauma after trauma, and just I think it's the way to do a twist in this form, is that it sort of informs what happened, kind of makes you recalibrate what you saw, but like pushes the plot forward in such a fantastic way.
Well, then you see this massive shift in Niles that you haven't, like, he is such a cute, like, I'm just a cute kid who likes my mom and my grandma, and we hang out, and she taught me how to astral project myself into birds and shit, and I'm just having a great time, and my twin is a psychopath. And then all of a sudden you have the twist, and then I was like, and again, texting Terry, there's 30 minutes left in this movie. What is about to fucking happen? And then he's just an outright little evil asshole. But like, in a way that, again, in the 1970s is incredibly surprising. I mean, he drowns a whole baby as opposed to half a baby. But like that
moment.
But it was so fun.
And that's a very Mockingbird kind of like the vibe of it. You go and look at the acting and this vibe.
The way everyone like runs into the house and is like screaming and in anguish. But then it's funny because I can tell, like, me being a person who watches so much horror in this day and age, when the sister is pregnant, I'm like, something's happening to the baby. As like either she's getting stabbed in the stomach or something is happening to the baby. I did not expect it to be a drowning of a newborn. That was a little bit more intense than I was expecting. But like, it is so funny how movies like this existed before we have these tropes, and it's so funny to revisit them and be like, oh wait. It's interesting to see how these things that we're so used to now, where they probably came from. In a movie that no one talks about. In a movie that I never hear talk about.
I know, that's what's weird. Like, maybe they don't talk about it because people stole some ideas from it, and then we're just like, this one didn't quite make it, so let's pretend it doesn't exist so we can keep moving forward with these great twists. I don't know.
It's such a disarming film too. I mean, we've kind of talked a little bit about it, but the way the movie opens, it's very kind of quaint, rural. It's sort of like country nostalgia, which is sort of this thing that I would say Robert Mulligan did sort of with his other two movies, like that came before this that I'm thinking in particular, like The Summer of 42 and To Kill a Mockingbird, where it's sort of like, it feels almost like a romanticized version of the past, looking back through rose-colored glasses. And so when this movie starts like that, and I was like, this is the expectation, because I grew up watching To Kill a Mockingbird in as a kid. I read the book in school. We watched the movie. Like, I'm like, okay, this is giving me that kind of vibe. And then it just slowly, it even kind of presents like a romanticized family. Like, everyone seems to be happy. You don't see the mom. They talk about the mom, but she's like up in her room. And I'm like, what's up with the mom? Why is she away from the family? But there's, his brother or his sister and his sister's husband. She's pregnant. There's people all over the family. Like, it seems like a very happy, progressive, moving forward type family. And then you start to like slowly pick apart the layers and realize that no, this family had a double trauma of the father dying and then the son, one of the twins, falling down the well. And you start to pick at that. And it's like, boy, this is a really smart way of introducing the film.
Yeah. And, is that what made Niles, I guess, so twisted? Are those tragedies that happened to him in the story, or was he evil all the time?
And I was thinking, I was torn between whether this is like a supernatural movie or if it's like a mental mental illness type of story, because at one point I was like, ooh, this is sort of like a haunted house story, but the ghost is being kept alive by his brother's memory, maybe he's psychic and he's keeping him alive. And so it's sort of like the house is haunted by this dead kid. But then I was like, or is it, he's kind of dealing with like schizophrenia, and it's his grandma was trying to help him try to work through that by having empathy. Because like I was thinking about the moment when he first like astral projects into the bird, and she's like, what does it feel like? Do you see it? And sort of like showing him this is a real creature and showing like empathy. And so I was kind of torn between, is this supernatural, or is it just a kid that lost his father, lost his brother, and is just deeply destroyed?
I mean, the astral project thing is definitely a bit supernatural, and that to me is part of what's fun, is because the second to last image of the movie is the lock that's somehow like broken in a way that's impossible. So where you just kind of go, how did he get out of there? And was it literally he practically got out, or is there just something you can't explain about the story that makes it? I wonder. And to me, it probably makes it stick longer, knowing like, it's not just a bad seed. It's maybe something else. And certainly her setting it up with all of this astral projecting stuff,
right,
introduces like, if we're not completely in the real world, but in a grounded way. I don't know.
I was thinking when I was watching this, there's a lot of, I think one of the things this movie does really well too is uses images of like isolation, but doesn't really call attention to it. I'm thinking in particular, there's the baby in the jar at the carnival when they sneak into like the freak show, and he goes in and they're staring at that baby in the jar, which of course there's a little baby in the jar by the end of this movie. And there's the
foreshadowing. Yeah.
Wait, shit. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's just great foreshadowing. you know.
Whoa, fuck.
And then there's the Mexican jumping beans, which of course are little bugs that are trapped in the seeds. And so there's like, again, this idea of something being trapped and unable to escape from their situation. Holland hides in the cellar and Niles is asking him, what are you doing in the dark? And Niles says, I'm thinking, or Holland says, I'm thinking. And that's like kind of creepy as it is. But, the boarded up well becomes a plot point. At the very end, the last shot of the movie is Niles looking out at life behind glass, and it almost gives a blend of like, you know, kind of in the kind of insane asylum kind of look, like he's looking outside the glass of like a cell, like the house has become a cell to him. It's like all kind of representative of Niles's mental state of being unable to get past this event. And it's such a small little bit of environmental storytelling that I think is so subtle but good.
Yeah, I think that was a big part of like him directing the movie. You know, it was a strange choice for them to have him come on board and he'd done so many kind of tender character pieces in a way that had a side to them. And you know, I got to believe that in the hands of a kind of a different filmmaker, all that stuff could have been a little more ham-fisted and not nearly as interesting as you're describing it.
Yeah. And the horror moments of this are so good. Like I am surprised that like Niles, where is the baby, isn't like a more of like a tagline that people use in like horror, because it's such a chilling moment when Ada finally realizes what's going on and he's like, she's like, where's that baby? And he says, Holland's got the baby. He's bad. He's never going to go to heaven, which is another like kind of push and pull that this movie has, this idea of heaven and hell. Good people go to heaven. Bad people go to hell. Holland is going to hell. You know, Niles thinks he's going to heaven. The angel, like there's so much symbolic kind of storytelling here that I'm like, why isn't this movie being talked about more?
Yeah. I mean, that crazy dissolve, if you remember it, of the stained glass window of the angel to her, right before she then holds up her wings and falls down and with the fire. It's in those kind of moments of him trying to convince her that, like what you said, that Holland is going to hell. But what's so creepy to me about it is the whole time we're kind of in her point of view going, you know, my nephew, I guess, right? Is, you know, like everything he's saying is just digging him deeper into this well of a lie, and he may not even be, you know, cognizant of it,
right?
But it's like kind of heartbreaking. Yeah. Like everything he says just makes it more and more, points more and more the finger at the fact that he's the one doing everything, and the fact that like it's not going to change, and it won't.
No,
based on the way it ends.
Well, and the way she also blames herself too, because she's like, I was playing into it, like I was doing this to make you feel better, like I thought that this was helping you heal, and actually it was just making you evil. And there's a lot going on with her in terms of blaming herself, I think, and what's happened and in creating a monster. And she wants so badly to think he's not a monster, but then at the end when she's like, well, I guess you drowned a baby, and then she kind of martyrs herself for that and takes the blame for that. But then, and in my head, I was like, oh, for fuck's sake, another woman killing herself because of but then he's alive. He like is alive maybe at the end. And I was like, this is so twisted. Like there's no escaping this thing, whatever it is, whatever is happening. I got very like Omen-y vibes from it a little bit at the end.
Oh yeah.
And like, well, Jerry Goldsmith's score, not the same one, but like in my head I'm thinking The Omen already, but it's just like, and I think same time period. What did The Omen?
Oh yeah.
75?
A couple years. 4?
6, 5, 4? I can't remember, but it...
76.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they really drew upon it in some ways.
They had to, for sure, because it's just like this whole thing of her trying to stop an evil and thinking like, well, if I can stop this and everyone is safe, and then realizing that no matter what you think you're doing personally to stop something, like you are not bigger than whatever is going on. And while this film exists on maybe a smaller scale than The Omen, obviously, in terms of implications, I mean, at least outwardly, it's very interesting how this movie plays with that kind of, those ideas.
Well, it very much plays with the same way that The Omen ends. It's like, no, you can't, you have to kill your kid, you know? Like, you have to kill your son at the altar, and if you hesitate, that could be it for you, which is what happens in both movies, sort of. They both kind of fail at that because, she went all in and trying to, she could have done a better job maybe in ending him, but Gregory Peck?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, he, hesitated, right?
He sure did. Look what it got him.
Yeah. And they both had that a similar type ending, which like another film in that era.
Yeah, the kid looking at the camera in The Omen, the kid looking out the window here, like there's definite. I think there's a lot of movies that pull bits and pieces from this movie, because I was even thinking when she comes out in the flowing dress and she's starting to self-immolate, it brought me back memories of Saint Maud that came out a few years ago.
Yeah.
The last shot of that, where it's like, because there's even the kid, he's looking up at her in like ecstasy because he thinks he's seeing the angel, right? And it's actually her. And then there's the moment of realization, which is exactly how Saint Maud ends. And so I was thinking about that. I was thinking about like The Omen is obviously like, you can see kind of parallels here. It's just,
and the bad son, was something like, I remember thinking, this reminds me a bit, there's so many things. And that moment you described of, Niles looking up at her when she's coming down, like thinking, not that she's coming to save him, but that's his favorite person. I mean, that's his kind of angel. And then, but she's there to stop him.
And I think it's interesting because like when he's telling Holland, quote unquote, about, the angel and about, he's asking Holland, when you die, what do you think you see? And Holland's like, I think I'm going to be pretty much too concerned about dying to see anything. But he's like, but Holland says, how do you know the angel's going to take you to heaven? And he's like, well, only bad people go to hell. And so then there's that moment, and it's literally like burning, brimstone and fire in the place, and the angel is bringing him potentially to death, and he somehow, he escapes at the end. But it's like, again, so much like symmetry and so much symbolism here between the environmental storytelling and what's really happening with the plot that it just wowed me so much.
Well, and you just said that whole idea that, you don't go to hell if you're not a bad person. And him, the look on his face when she comes to kill him, until the bitter end. And of course he survived it. He didn't think he was bad,
Right.
Strangely, but he was.
Also, I realized that, I have not really seen Uta Hagen in a whole lot of film. And it turns out I did a little bit of digging. She was like blacklisted in Hollywood.
Oh, really?
As part of like they thought she was part of the Communist Party.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
And so a lot of actors, people got blacklisted. So she did a lot of TV and a lot of like theater at that point. But her filmography is very, very small. I think this might have been her first full movie.
Jesus, wow.
And it was a big deal. She was a big deal. But I didn't know that. I didn't know that she got blacklisted. Poor thing.
Yeah. And I was thinking about how like...
I'm sure she wasn't a communist.
Right. Red Scare, like that whole era, just wild. But I was thinking about how like Niles is sort of like an outcast in his mind. And I was thinking about how Uta Hagen was sort of outcast from Hollywood. And then I was also thinking about how the screenwriter, Tom Tryon, he was a closeted actor throughout the time in making movies, and had a really terrible experience with The Cardinal, where the film's director fired him in front of his parents when they came to the set one day.
Oh, wow.
To like humiliate him, and then hired him back. And that was like the moment that he quit acting and decided he wanted to be a novelist. And then that's how this movie kind of got birthed from what I was seeing. And I'm just thinking about how all these people kind of attached to this, the writer, this big actress, were all sort of others in Hollywood. Yeah.
I wondered when I saw that, he had been a working actor for 20 years or something, and to shift to becoming a novelist and this being your first novel, it's like, that's definitely, there was something underneath that, there was something there. Yeah. Which is interesting what you said.
It's wild to me how many people we end up finding out, were queer at that time and just couldn't, because like we've been going on like a binge of old movies on our like little mini-sode that we do, and just seeing all these people who had to be in the closet at that time and were sort of like working because of the Hays Code and all that kind of stuff that was happening. It's wild to me to see all of this talent that you would eventually later on find out, oh yeah, they were gay or they were queer or they were closeted. It's just, I don't know, it's heartbreaking, but it's also like, yeah, there's a lot of queer people making stuff that people don't realize were queer. And I think it's weird.
Super talented, super creative. And, you know, it must have been a terrible existence sort of, you know, for them to be hiding on that level.
Yeah.
Well, do we want to start wrapping up and give this a rating out of 5, Terry?
That sounds good.
Oh.
So Terry, how many desiccated ring fingers cut off of the corpse of your dead twin brother out of 5 do you give the other?
That moment, I was like, no, is this really happening? Is that where the finger came? I was like, no. The horror moments in this are just
after
indelible.
The kid took it from the dad, you know.
I know. I was like, wait a second. Are we just all...
And that's why he pushed Mom down the steps.
Yes, like, are we all just like cutting off fingers and taking rings? Like, what is happening here with this family? Like, I have so many questions about what is going on with this fucking family. Anyway.
The idea of lineage, like Niles and Holland thinking that, you know, the ring belongs to them, and the sort of like keeping that, because the peregrine falcon is such a big image in the film. It's on, there's like a wind thing that spins around at the top, and it's the symbol on the ring. It's such a, I don't know, the idea of legacy and it kind of potentially ending with like the ring and the father's crypt and not getting passed on is such a, I don't know, that's a whole other angle that I feel like could be dug into. But this movie's great. I love this movie so much. I was surprised at how much I loved it, considering that I don't hear people talk about it. And for me, I do think that this movie is probably 4. I'm going to cut one of those desiccated fingers in half. 4.5 out of 5 desiccated ring fingers to me. I was blown away by this movie, and I want to talk about it and evangelize it to everyone. What about you, Mary Beth?
I think similar, 4.5. I think I was unsure at first. I was like, okay, it's just like a kid being a weird kid with his weird brother. Terrible me assuming things about. I've seen all the horror movies, but it surprised me, and I love it when these movies surprise me and find a gem like this that needs to be given more love and appreciated. Like, I think there's this thought that movies from before a certain time are like not scary, but like transgressive and pushing boundaries, and like I think this movie is transgressive in existing in this time period, and also for the lengths it goes to. I still don't think I give like horror movies from this era enough credit, and I think I'm continuing to be surprised, and movies like this are making me realize that like, no, we've all been fucked up. It's not just now. Like, we've always been kind of fucked up, just a different kind of fucked up. It's not a gory fucked up, but babies are still getting drowned in wine barrels, so like, don't you worry. So
that image,
I know. I was like, good lord. But yeah. So, Brent, you have the final say. How many desiccated ring fingers out of 5 do you give?
Oh, I give it 5, of course. I mean, it's scarred me for life. It's made me, it's dictated so much of like everything I do, in storytelling. And it comes from a time when, when one of the New York Times bestseller is that book, like what a great time to be reading books, even before they made the film.
Yeah.
So, and it is, it's exciting to me that virtually nobody ever knows about it. If I mention it as something that is near and dear to my heart. So yeah, it's easy for me, obviously, to score it like that.
Yeah.
The only downside is it's hard to find here in the States.
It's so hard to find.
Where did you guys find it?
We had to reach out to some friends who had a digital copy of it to watch, because like I couldn't find it anywhere. Like,
I've got
Blu-rays and DVDs were like over $100 to order. Like, it's not readily available here, and I'm like, why isn't this movie readily available? It should be streaming. It should be giving a Criterion release. Like, it should be getting all of this. Like,
yeah.
And by the way, the trailer, I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you guys looked at it. It's like crazy tone.
Where is the baby?
For the
prairies of New England, terrible things began to happen that summer. There were secret terrors, secret places. But the most frightening secret of all is yet to come. The shocking bestseller, 20th Century Fox, presents a new concept of terror and madness. Oh, Mark! There have been all the others. Now there is the other, rated PG.
The posters, like the monochromatic, like really graphic posters, the tagline. I mean, so many things about it are just so
Please
terrifying.
don't reveal the secret of the other. I love when movies do that.
Isn't that amazing?
I love that. That was the coolest poster. And then said, Holland has the baby. Holland, where's the baby? I was like, these posters are so good. It was like very yellow. Oh, it's just so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yellow, black, and white.
So cool. Well, thank you so much, Brent, for joining us to talk about this movie. And when someone asks, what is the most fucked up PG movie you've ever seen? I can point to this movie because, good Lord, I know why this movie wasn't rated R, and I know PG-13 didn't exist, but this is not a PG movie. Like, no. Wow. So thank you so much. But where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up that you can talk about and share?
Well, you can find me anywhere on Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff. But just finished a movie called Lord of Misrule, which is kind of a pagan horror film about a small village outside of, in the UK that follows a female vicar, a reverend, and her husband and her daughter. They're new to this small village, and the daughter goes missing at a pagan festival. Ooh. And then as she tries to find, who tries to find her daughter, it becomes very apparent that the pagan festival that these people treat as kind of fun is actually much more ingrained in their history. And so, it was Tuppence Middleton, who's just incredible, an incredible actress, and Ralph Ineson from The Witch.
Oh yeah.
Which you will see is, this is the best thing you've seen him in, except for The Witch. He's been great, and he was great in The Green Knight, things like, but it's like this movie, the character he plays in this movie was written for a 60-year-old woman. And I was in London and I wanted him to be in the movie, but there wasn't a great part for him. And he, was going to do a cameo. And then I kind of had the idea of like, what if you play Jocelyn, this woman who's the kind of the villain of the whole movie? And then we worked it out and he did. And it was just, it's amazing. I'm literally like blocking picture on the movie.
Absolutely. His voice, scary. Like his voice alone is just like something.
We did a trailer, and you don't need a trailer guy's voice because you have the character talking and he sounds, it's just, it's pretty epic.
Oh, hell yeah. Oh, I'm very excited for that.
But it's great. I'm excited. And that's, and I have a series at Sony with Chris Morgan called, which is based on Peter Straub's book, Floating Dragon.
Oh,
okay.
So it's Floating Dragon, but which is an epic, which is the book that's inspired so much of like things like Stranger Things and stuff.
Fuck yeah.
It's an epic 600-page horror novel that could be 1,000 pages.
Cool.
Anyway,
awesome.
That's cool.
Those are the things I'm working on right now.
Hell yeah.
Cool. Well, listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. Have you seen The Other? We would love to hear about it. And if you watch The Other because of this podcast, also let us know, because everyone should be watching this movie. You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm a Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there. But most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.